Hello, my name is Andrew Keane. Welcome to Keane on America, the daily show about everything that matters, with the world's leading commentators and thinkers. Hello everybody. Books about running seem to be about going somewhere, fleeing from something or coming towards something. There's a new bestseller in the United States on running. It's called The Running Ground. It's by Nicholas Thompson. He's the CEO of The Atlantic. That's his day job, but I don't quite know how he manages to get enough time to write a book. It's a book which is autobiographical and confessional, and it seems, in a way, Nick, as if it's a book about, I'm not sure whether you're running away or running towards your father.
It's both. I mean, my father, the book is, a large part of it is about my father. He's an extremely complicated and interesting man. He got me running when I was 5 or 6 years old. My earliest memories of the sport are watching him in the 1982 New York City Marathon. You know, he was my largest champion as a runner when I became quite good at it. And then the interesting thing that happened is that I was a pretty good marathoner. In my 30s, I ran 2:43 for a marathon, and people are marathoners. That's like a good time. Like, you can win gift certificates if you do that. After my father died, I started to take the sport more seriously, in part as a way of mourning him, as part of how we connected. And then I improved a lot. I set an American record, ran a 2:29, became the top-ranked runner in the world at my age for 50 miles. And it's partly about using running as a way to connect with my father, and then also the practice of running as a discipline so that I didn't become my father.
We all become our fathers, for better or worse.
God, I hope not. As I said about my parents, people would ask me what my parents do for a living, and I would say, my mother's an art historian at Babson, my father runs a male brothel in Bali. So I'm hopeful of a different career path.
But in all seriousness, we do become our parents one way or the other, even if we sometimes learn from them. Tell me more about your father. I know that he began his career as someone who, some people at least thought, might end up as American president.
Yeah, I mean, he was an extremely promising young man. He grew up in Oklahoma. He had an overbearing father, kind of a different model of masculinity, or sort of a classic American model of masculinity. You know, he comes from this family of frontiermen, you know, Lewis and Clark Porters, people who are out like union activists out in Elko. And his father was a, bushy eyebrow Golden Gloves boxing champion, but my dad wasn't like that at all. And he didn't want to live in that house. He didn't want to be part of that family. And he got away, and he had the world's fastest rise of the American meritocracy. Right, he goes from riding horseback in Oklahoma to student at Andover, scholarship student at Stanford, Rhodes scholarship. Comes back. It just seems like his political prospects are crazy. When he was at Stanford, the Saturday Evening Post runs a feature story on him. It's called "The College Student." It's got John Kennedy quoted in it, saying, "This kid's gonna be president before me." The guy was amazing. He comes back, and life is hard. Even if you win a Rhodes Scholarship, life can be hard after that. And kind of got unraveled. He realized he was gay. His political career never took off after coming out of the closet, or simultaneously. He left my mother, he left our family. He was Ronald Reagan's first openly gay, or he was America's actually first openly gay presidential appointee. He was a Republican Cold Warrior while coming out of the closet, and that's deeply admirable. But he had a really hard time coping with his sexuality, and he had a really rough sex addiction his last 20 years, and led to all kinds of troubles with prostitutes and crazy people and inappropriate relationships, that some of which I go into in the book.
And what about the running?
Well, he, as he was dealing with his demons in the late 1970s, he started to run. It's part of the American running boom. He had never thought he could be good at sports, and he'd always been wary of sports because his father had tried so hard to push him into sports. So he, in fact, starts running kind of once his father dies, he's able to, run more effectively. He runs a 3-hour marathon when he's, 40 years old, which is quite impressive. And then running is something he does through his 40s and 50s. And my view, looking through his diaries, looking through his life, talking to people, was that when he ran, he drank less. When he ran, he went to bed earlier. When he ran, he kept his life more disciplined and ordered. When he stopped running, that's when the chaos hit.
And when you were growing up, were you close to him?
Oh, very. I was close to him my whole life. I mean, we emailed every day. we were profoundly close. Didn't spend a ton of time together because he wasn't there. My mother raised me. He's living in Washington. I grew up in Boston. But, by the time I lived with him a little bit in my 20s when I was a young journalist in Washington. And then we communicated all the time.
Was he a good father?
Hard to define that. If the question of whether you're a good father is whether you go bankrupt, lean upon your children, ask them to perform bigamist weddings, threaten to kill yourself, blackmail them, then no. If the standard is, does he love you every day and support you completely, then the answer is yes.
There seems to be a generational quality to your father that maybe one day you'll write a book purely about him or his generation.
Yeah.
People once spoke about that generation, I guess, as the greatest generation. It's probably not the best word to describe his generation, but what was it about this generation? I'm not saying that the whole generation came out of the closet, but there was, not just in sexual terms, but in cultural and political terms, this giant rebellion.
Yeah. Well, my father's he's kind of a little bit off that trajectory. So he was born in 1942. And, by the time he graduates from college in 63, Rhodes Scholarship in 67. So he doesn't get drafted. He's not part of Vietnam. He doesn't go to Woodstock, right? Because he also gets tracked in sort of the Cold War Republican track. So he's not in the cultural revolution. But there's something that he dealt with that comes up in this really interesting way in his life, where there was a idealization about, particularly white male college students at that age who were successful, that grease the wheels for future success, but also makes things harder. So one of the key moments in my dad's life is he had this very good friend named Roger Hansen. Hansen was a couple years older. Like my dad, a Rhodes Scholar. Like my dad, talked to the president. Like my dad, photographed by, in Life magazine, this big spread on Roger Hansen. And like my dad, became an academic and didn't live up to his promise. And like my dad, was gay. And he and my father get very close in the 1980s. But Hansen can't deal with his sexuality at all. My dad's a little more open about it. Hansen's just, gay bars at the edge of town. And in 1990, Hansen borrows my father's house in Rehoboth. So Hansen is written about in this famous book, Remembering Denny by Calvin Trillin, but a lot of this is not a big part of it. Hansen goes to my father's house in Rehoboth and kills himself in the garage. And my dad, he would always say to me, "He whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make promising." Right? And he would always hold on to the memory of Hansen as well, wait, this is a lesson in what happens if you can't be open about your sexuality, if you have to repress it, if you have to suppress it. And that was partly why my dad became so flamboyantly open after that. But when you talk about that generation, yes, one of the things that's hard about that generation, people who are 20 years younger and were gay, they would just stay in the closet their whole life because it was impossible to be out. People who are 20 years older would just stay in the closet. People who are 20 years younger, they would have just come out, right? And my dad was kind of in the middle where people are starting to come out. It's the AIDS crisis. So I think there was something uniquely hard about being gay in that generation.
Is there a political message there? I know your day job is at The Atlantic. One of the people that you publish extensively, is an old friend of mine, is John Rauch, who, amongst others, did a great deal for legalizing American gay marriage. Could your father's narrative been different if he'd have met the man of his dreams and got married?
Yeah, I remember hanging out with John Rauch and his husband Michael with my dad, and my dad, my dad had been able to stay with a single guy. Totally. He could have. My dad was married in Massachusetts. He was a pioneer in gay marriage. Now the problem is, after that, he sort of exchanged rings with 30 other people. My dad was the counterpoint against gay marriage. Why would you let these guys be married? So, his problem was he just couldn't control his sexual desires at all. And he let that get in the way of monogamy.
Speaking of not controlling your sexual desires, how did your mother deal with your father's running?
Oh, that's an interesting question. He starts running they get divorced in 1981, 82. He starts running in 79, 80. As far as I know, he just went out and run, and I think she probably thought it was a healthy, good thing for him, but it was also tied into, obviously, you get divorced. It's a very hard part of life.
And the reason I ask that is because I know in your new book, The Running Ground, you write about the selfishness of the runner,
Yeah.
and how sometimes you feel rather guilty because of the hours it spends. You've got small children, you've got a wife who sounds very unselfish. Runners are, by definition, selfish, aren't they? They have to be.
Well, I mean, yes, there's an element of selfishness that comes into running, and runners can be profoundly, self-absorbed, and like they sit down and you start talking to them, they start telling you about their resting heart rate, and like they're so worried about like this little thing in their iliotibial band. But running can also be selfless, right? It can also make you part of a wonderful community, right? It can also be a thing that opens your mind spiritually. It can be a form of profound meditation. It can teach you about pacing, right? There's a lot of like very valuable lessons that come from running, though yes, it can also make you selfish. And like one of the challenges in my life is I got a job, I got podcasts to record, right? I like don't have infinite amount of time, and so trying to figure out how to fit, the training regime needed for elite performance in with this life it's a challenge.
I know in the book you write about, firstly, sometimes being there when your father ran, and sometimes not being there, your father sometimes being there, not being there, and then sometimes your son watching you running. Why is it so important, this relationship between the runner and their audience, particularly their family? Are you performing as a runner for your family?
I don't think so. I think that when I think about the relationship of running and my family, I do think there's some nice, valuable lessons, right? I do think that I take some pride in the fact that maybe it's not pride is the wrong word. I take some satisfaction in the knowledge that my children, I have 3 boys, will have seen me doing something where I was strong, where I was a model of strength in a certain way. They'll have watched me run a marathon where I was great, right? And by the time they're adults, I'll have declined to be decrepit, and I'll be walking marathons. But that's valuable. But that's not the most valuable way you can spend time with your kids. Like, it's a useful thing, but I'm sure they would rather you spend all those extra hours with them. So I'm not doing it for them, but there is a slight benefit for them. Now, there is one very nice thing, which is that now my middle son trains with me. He beat me in every race up to a mile. My little son trains with me sometimes. So it is a cool form of family bonding, though we also have that through tennis, through soccer, and through other sports.
A friend of mine runs a running group for kids, underprivileged kids in Massachusetts. We did a show recently with James Traub, a New York Times writer, on civic education. Mm-hmm. Do you think that running should be a piece of civic education? Do you think it makes one, in a way, if not a better citizen, but a more disciplined one? There's a certain sort of Puritanism. It's not surprising that running has become such a popular sport in America, especially perhaps in New England.
Yeah, I do think it comes there. I do think there's like stoic lessons from it, right? Like, if you want to become a great runner, you have to go out and you have to train every day, and you have to train every day in the weather, and you have to train every day in the cold, right? We're recording this in Munich, and I was out running on sheets of ice this morning, right? Like, you just have to go and do it, and it teaches you lessons about stoicism, and I think it does connect to Puritan ideals, and I think that's probably. I think part of the reason why running is booming so much is actually a reaction to social media, right? And we have all these things that are like pulling us into our phones and pulling us into these manufactured worlds, and it's nice to go out in your real world and circle an actual environment, see things, and it's nice to be disconnected from your phone and out there. So those are some of the reasons I think it's growing.
What's it like, Nick, to run? You've been very successful. I'm not really. The question isn't so much about what it's like to run successfully, but what's the experience like? Is it somehow a religious experience, mesmerizing in a sense? You get lost in your own world. I know in the book you talk of it being, and you're not alone here, it's a psychological sport rather than a physiological one in many ways.
Yeah, you definitely do. A religious experience might be a little bit strong, but meditative experience, you definitely do reach states of consciousness that I think can be hard to reach in other ways. I do think that there's a combination of putting stress on your body and then having your mind opened up to the outside that is a really beautiful spot to be in. Now, there are different ways of running. Like, you can go out, put your headphones on, and go run around and be looking at your pace and your time, and that's not that different from going to a gym and jumping on a treadmill. But if you go out there and you're running, maybe it's someplace pretty, maybe it's someplace not, and you're really paying attention to what you see. You're tracking, you're understanding the city you're in, you're listening to the birds, you're listening to, you're feeling the trees. Like, that's a different experience.
The book is about your relationship with your father, a runner. You're a runner. You write in the book about your wife and your mother. There isn't a gendered quality, though, to running. I mean, as many women run as men, don't they?
Oh, totally. And the book, the book is somewhat male because it's about me and my father and my sons, but they're also, profiles partly for this reason. There's stories of 5 different runners who I know, who my life intersected with, who teach you about running on the edge. And in fact, there are 3 women who are part of these 5 profiles. The first is woman Bobby Gibb, the first woman to run the Boston Marathon, who trains by getting in a van and driving across the country, sleeping in a different park and running for several hours every night. Second one is this woman, Julia Lucas, who's a training partner of mine, who cared so much about running that she actually was homeless while training for the United States Olympic team. Like, lived in a park in Portland, because you can't really make a lot of money running, but so absolutely into it. And the third is this woman, Super Babek Jord, who ran a store down the street from me in DC. For 9 years in a row, she won this race that's 3,000 miles around the same block in Queens. You start in August, you end in October. So these people are even more intense about their running lives than I am about mine.
Culturally, maybe running finds a home in New England, but of course, the best runners in the world, at least my knowledge, not particularly substantial, are from Kenya. I was in Kenya last year. I've often wondered, what is it about the Kenyans and the Ethiopians, Nick, that make them such great runners?
Couple things. Cultural, right? Once you see successful models, you're more likely to run. 2, genetics, and you live in an area where you're relatively at high elevation, there's relatively low malaria. The genes that tends to select for are genes where you end up leaner, different center of mass, higher center of gravity, makes you a more efficient runner. And then I think that there's, running, as I said, isn't a sport that makes you a lot of money if you're living in America, but it's a sport that does make you a lot of money if you're in Kenya. And so the grit and determination, and a number of Kenyans or Ethiopians who see this as, a way to real success, builds up a culture of people who just train really hard, and they're great at it.
Are the great days of the marathon over? I remember when I was growing up, the marathon and marathon runners were global, if not global superstars, certainly super athletes.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not paying enough attention, but it doesn't strike me as if the marathon and marathon culture is quite as illustrious as it once was.
Well, Eliud Kipchoge is a global star, but I think you're right. And I do think that what's happened is that the marathon, this is a really interesting thing, right? If you look at the number of finishers in the New York Marathon versus, say, 1980, right? Massively more. Maybe there were 800 who finished then, right? And now there are 50,000, right? So many more people do it. The average time has gone way down. And in fact, the time of the winners has gone up, but even in that smaller race, the time of the person who come in 100th place has gotten slower. So basically, many, many, many more people do it. And not only is the average time slower, but with the exception of the very top, everybody's getting slower. And so I think people just kind of care less about being fast. And so that maybe means that the winners aren't as celebrated as they used to be. Also, I think the fact that, for 20 years, the biggest marathons were in America, and they were, won by 16 different Kenyans, kind of made it hard for people to, develop emotional relationships with the winners. Back in the 70s, Bill Rogers is winning, Frank Shorter's getting gold, Alberto Salazar is, burning himself to the edge of death, Joan Benoit Samuelson is winning. It was a little easier for Westerners to be excited about it.
You care about timing, though, don't you? You care about being the fastest, in the over 50s. What's your...
So until just a few weeks ago, I was the fastest in the world above 45 in the 50 mile.
Whoops, so did I just stumble on your age, your new age?
Whatever, doesn't matter.
But why'd you care so much?
And that's actually a really good question. I've always been trained to believe that faster is better, doing better is better. I like being able to set a challenge and going for it. I like the precision of the training that you try to go to elite, but it is true, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to come in 30th in the marathon instead of 50th, or to run. There's no moral There's nothing morally better about running a 2:29 marathon versus 2:31, but I love the process of setting goals and going for it. And
did your father tell you that? Do you tell your sons that?
My father did tell me that. I tell my sons that, but not as directly as my father told me that.
And they probably know you're lying.
I mean, they can't. They see through it. They know that I really wanted to break 2:30. Yeah. And they know I was really happy when I did, and they know I was frustrated when I didn't. And in fact, all right, here's a good story about parenting. I ran the New York Marathon a couple months ago, and I ate it, right? Just the worst marathon I've run by 25 minutes, right? I went into the train cycle hoping to run 2:35. I ran at 3:06, right? Just completely blew up. No one knows, no one cares, right? And so everybody like texts like, great job, Nick, you look so fast, you look awesome. Oh my God, 3:06, that's awesome. I'm like, it's 25 minutes worse than my worst marathon, right? And I'm all upset and I'm pissed off. But like, yeah, nobody cares. I get home, I come into the house, kids are off to soccer. Middle son comes in. A few minutes after I'm there, I'm drinking a glass of water. He's like, Dad. I'm like, yeah. He's like, what was that? I'm like, I don't know, respiratory infection, rough day. He's like, do not post that on Strava. Do not tell anybody you ran. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, enter another marathon immediately and bury that garbage. So I guess he understands going fast.
No, he's certainly your son. Final question, Nick, in this marathon interview. You've written a book, which is rather like running a marathon. Some people say writing a book is like having a child. What, as a marathon not a marathon rider, a marathon runner,
Yeah.
how did that help you with the book? Because your day job is at the Atlantic, running that. That's a pretty serious business. So what can writers teach marathon runners and vice versa?
Well, I mean, the lesson from marathoning is, if you want to get faster, you have to train every day, right? And you have to train every day, and some days you have to train hard. And if you don't do that, you don't get faster, right? And if you take 3 days off, you're not going to get faster.
So
right?
this is the Gladwell rule or the Thompson rule?
The Gladwell rule is probably a little different because the Gladwell rule, if you're thinking of the 10,000 hour rule, right, that's just cumulative time.
Probably 10,000 miles.
This is more just like more consistent effort.
Every day.
Every day. But what's also interesting about it is that if you do it and you run every day, you do get faster, right? And if you want to write a book and you make progress every day, there's like moments where you're like, God, how on earth am I going to write a book? Like I've written 0 words. But if you work on it every day, eventually it's done. And like that was the lesson. I just worked on it steadily every day. Sometimes just like 15 minutes, right? Because I get a busy job. But you do that and you do it over and over and over. Some days you work on it for 3 hours because you're on a flight or it's whatever's happening. And it got done.
Well, there you have it. The running ground, a father, a son, and the simplest of sports. Maybe not the simplest of people, Nick Thompson and his father. Nick, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I'm intrigued by this connection between marathon running and writing. I've never realized why I'm struggling so much to do my book. Maybe I need to take up marathon running.
That's either that or don't podcast every day. But yes, thank you, Andrew.